I'm a science teacher at Menominee Indian High School, and right now you are in the Menominee Indian High School Aquaponics Center. This is about a 30 by 90 greenhouse that hosts tilapia, bluegill, and perch, growing a variety of lettuces and other fruits and vegetables, such as tomatoes, onions, cucumbers. What you're looking at here is our Aquaponics Center. So what is aquaponics? It's a mixture of aquaculture, which is raising fish, and hydroponics, growing produce or growing plants without soil. So we take these two and we combine it together. Our fish fertilize our plants, and our plants are using the nutrients, and this water circulates all together. So it's a symbiotic relationship that these all share in a circulating system. So in our tanks here, we have about 100 tilapia in each tank. Right now we have a small, a medium, and a large tilapia. Our largest will be the ones harvested first, and our nursery system over there starts our fish. So once we harvest our large fish, we can move them into our system and we will not lose any production. So what happens is we have our tilapia in here and we feed our fish or raise them to grow them. Well, fish give off waste, and our waste are going to be drained out through the bottom of the tank. The tank, the water then goes to what we call a clarifier tank. Our clarifying tank is a settling basin. All of the solids from the fish settle to the bottom, and the remaining water moves through our system. We're able to remove the solids, and then it goes to what we call a mineralization tank. Inside our mineralization tank is a mesh webbing. And inside that webbing is actually a set of good bacteria. From our waste, we get ammonia in high amounts. So what we need to do is we need to break down that ammonia into something called nitrite. Well, then we have more bacteria that break down that nitrite into nitrate. Our plants love nitrate. So our plants are the ones that use the nitrate that's out of the system, and then our water is cleaned up and circulates back to our fish tank. So we are circulating our water from our fish tanks through our plants back to our fish again. What you're looking at now is our clarifier. What happens are the solids are settling in this tank before the water moves into our mineralization tank. So remove solids from the water. Our mineralization tank is where our mesh netting hosts bacteria. In this netting is good bacteria that's able to break down that ammonia into what we call nitrite. The nitrite is then further broke down into nitrate. The nitrate is the type of fertilizer that our plants would like to use. So all of our lettuces that you can see in our grow beds over here are utilizing the nitrate from our system to grow, and then this water is circulated back into our fish tanks once those nutrients are soaked up. So this is a one big circulating system where this ecosystem, or the nitrogen cycle, would take place outside, is now brought into one system indoors. As you can see, some of these plants are larger than the others because these are going to be harvested today, and these smaller plants were from other areas that were harvested earlier and reseeded. So that way we always have a cycle. Every week we can harvest new lettuce and replant for the next few weeks to come. Once we get over to here, we have all of our fish tanks. So in our fish tanks here, about 100 tilapia are in each tank. This first tank, fish tank 1, hosts our smaller tilapia. Our fish tank 2 holds our medium-sized fish. And then fish tank 3 holds our biggest fish. These fish will be ready for harvest in another few months. Hopefully this fall, we will have a fish fry coming for the new school year. All right, the feeding system that you see on each of these tanks are for the summer. So what happens here, these are automatic feeders. that we can set the amount of fish food that is going to be dispensed at each time, and we can feed these fish 3 times a day. So we make sure that our reservoirs are full, we set up our time that we want them and the amount to be dispensed. And it helps us out tremendously. Here we see fish food being dispensed. Time to feed. Another part of the system that we have here is what we call a sump tank. So if there's any water that evaporates or used up by the plants, we can keep our water levels the same with our sump tank. So it is set on a float that if any water is used up, the pump adds more water to it. Right here, we have a water heater, so we can keep our water temperatures warm for our fish. So we can grow fish year-round and have production of plants. Inside each tank, we have aerating stones, and underneath each grow bed, we have aerating stones as well, because that's how we give air or oxygen to the root systems. So you ask, how can you grow plants without soil? Well, we can grow them on these styrofoam rafts and give them all the nutrients and water that we can, but with this aerating system, it gives that oxygen to the roots that allows them to grow. Our smallest plants right here are the ones that were newly planted. As we move on, we see larger plants, and when we get to this side, we see our largest plants here. The largest plants here are ready for harvest. So today, we'll be harvesting the lettuce, which will be going to our community, and we'll be reseeding all of these lettuce plants. So that way, we'll have another cycle coming up in 40. Every week we harvest lettuce, and each week it goes to a different school. One week goes to the high school, the next week goes to our middle school, and then the week after that goes to Keshena Primary School, and then that following third week goes back to our high school again. The students here would help out and harvest the lettuce, and once we harvest, we have to reseed, so we get to see a full cycle of plants within 15 days. So a few neat things about this greenhouse is everything is automated, and we have sensors located throughout our greenhouse. One of the sensors here tells us how much humidity there is. We have sensors that tells us how much light is coming through, and we also have sensors that tell our fans to kick on and off, so we can help circulate air throughout this greenhouse. On the sides of these buildings, you can see the mesh netting, and that's to keep out bugs because the side vents will open up when it is too warm in here and help circulate air. The ceiling, when you take a look up there, we have shade cloths. So when there's too much sun, these shade cloths get pulled across and reduce the amount of sunlight that are coming in. So as you can see on the ceiling, we have HPS, high pressure sodium, grow lights. This allows us to extend our growing season. During the summer, we have longer hours of daylight, but during winter, we have shorter hours of daylight. So with our grow lights, we can set these up on timers and increase the amount of sunlight that these plants get. So this is our nursery system. This is a smaller tank system that allows us to raise fish to get larger to go into our bigger system. In this tank right here, we have bluegills and tilapia, and in our second tank over here, we're able to raise perch. Now this right here, this system is just a smaller version of our large system on this side. So instead of having 12 grow beds, we only have 1. I'd like to introduce you to a couple of different growing opportunities that we have in here. This is what we call a vertical garden. We have a reservoir based on the bottom, and we have a pump in there that pumps the water and nutrients up to the top. Once it gets up to the top, it sprays out in 4 different directions, and from there, the water will flow down and feed each tray below it. The vertical garden method allows us to grow more plants in a smaller footprint. Instead of spread out, we spread up. Another growing technique we use is aeroponics. So aeroponics is similar to the nutrient film technique. And what happens is we have a reservoir system and a pump that pumps water into our channel up here. This channel has a hose that sprays water. So it sprays nutrient-rich liquids on cups that hold clay pebbles. So the clay pebbles just give structure for the roots to grow through. The nutrients that are spraying on this go directly to the plant, so that way it has all of the nutrients it can need, and that spray keeps those roots moist. Right here, what we have are native tobacco plants. So Menominee Indian High School raises tobacco plants, and once the leaves are growing, we'll harvest them and dry them out, and they actually are used for native prayers. On our left-hand side here, we have flood and drain tables, so they're set on timers. All these tables flood up from the bottom, and then they'll drain out back into our reservoir. Right here, we have pollinator plants. Here we have some mint plants and some tomatoes that were started. We are back to our Groji buckets. So we call them Groji because they have emojis. So how does this work? We take a close look and we remove our top mesh. We have clay pebbles that are located in there to give our roots structure. And we actually have a 5-gallon bucket of nutrient water. In the bottom of the bucket is an air stone. So this air stone aerates the roots so that way these plants can grow. Now what we're going to grow in here today are cucumbers. So we started cucumbers. We're going to remove them from this tray. We are going to be planting them in the clay pebbles. And this aeration will aerate the roots and it will receive all the nutrients it needs to grow from here. Growing tomatoes out of 5-gallon buckets with aerators in the bottom. We call them Groji buckets. As I was explaining with the Aeroponics system, this one is growing tobacco plants. So plants, you can see, have a root system that needs water to be sprayed. And those clay pebbles are hosting the roots, so giving it structure. Now as you take a closer look, you can see the spray bar inside spraying on the roots. So a neat thing about tobacco plants, each of these flowers are going to hold a seed pod. And in each of these seed pods are going to be about 100 seeds. So they're very small. So as you can see, we have a plethora of flowers on here. So this will give us a lot of seeds for the next set of tobacco plants that we grow. In another part of our greenhouse, I'd like to show you an opportunity that we received this year from the Sand County Foundation Pollinator Grant. This grant allowed us to get 720 native plants for native pollinators, so bees and butterflies, so they have an area to pollinate, and we also have an orchard across the road, Johnny's Apple Orchard, so they can pollinate those trees for us. But this is a stepping stone into a larger project, so we'll be planting these plants in a garden on campus. So these 5 plants, or 5 types of plants that we received are world milkweed, blazing star liatris, blue aster, purple coneflower, and coreopsis. So these plants are in small trays that are 1 by 1. What we're going to be doing later on today is grabbing these plants and and transplanting them into larger containers. So that way we can raise them for another few weeks, and then we can transplant them to being outside. One of our questions that we typically get is about nutrients and when we add fertilizer to the plants. So how do the plants get fertilizer? How do you measure that? So all of our fertilizers are measured by NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So what do each of these do? Nitrogen is more for growing the leafy greens. As we transition in from the leafy green stage into our flowering stage, we need a different set of nutrients. So that's where we start adding more phosphorus. The flowering allows us to get our fruit. Once we're starting to fruit, we want to increase the amount of potassium that we get to grow a larger fruit. So when we take a look at NPK, the amounts of each of these letters tell us the amount of nitrogen, the amount of phosphorus, or the amount of potassium that's in there. And we want to adjust the amounts that we give them for the three different stages: the leafy green stage, the flowering stage, and our fruiting stage. To further go on with the nutrient levels, what we have is pH and ppm. So pH measures our acidity, our acid, and base levels. So the lower the acid on a pH scale, the stronger the acid is. The higher the base, the stronger it is. When it gets neutral towards 7, that's about pure water. Now ppm, parts per million. So when you say 1 in a million, that means that there's only 1 part per that million. Now we have 3 different types of plants here. We have tomatoes, cucumbers, and lettuce. When we take a look at the pH levels, or the nutrient levels for each of these plants, they're different. Tomatoes need a pH of 5.5 to 6.5, so they like slightly acidic nutrients. They have a parts per million of 1,400 to 3,500, so they have a very high nutrient level. Cucumbers, pH level of 5.8 to 6.0, parts per million, 1,190 to 1,750. Now lettuce, pH 5.5 to 6.5, and our parts per million is only 560 to 840. The low levels that are needed makes it an ideal crop for an aquaponics system. They grow really fast, they have all of the water that they need and the nutrients right there. Whereas our tomatoes and our cucumbers, we're going to need a higher parts per million, so we have to add more fertilizer to it. These are all the different types of fertilizers that are available. So depending on that level of where they are for growing, whether they need more leafy greens, they need that bloom, or they're ready to fruit, we have different types of fertilizers for them. So when we take a look at our lettuce formula, remember we have NPK. We have different calcium nitrate formula. NPK again, it tells us the amount of nutrients that are there in each different levels. How much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium. So when we are ready to grow, we have 3 different bottles here from General Hydroponics. We have a Flora Bloom, a Flora Grow, and a Floral Micro. So when we are starting to grow plants, we'd like to use that Floral Grow to start off. As we transition into our flowering stage, we're going to use that Micro. We're right in between growing leaves and flowering. Once we hit that flowering stage, we want to use Flora Bloom. This gives us a higher amount of potassium and phosphorus for those flowers to bloom and those fruits to start off. So when we talk about acidity or the pH level, there are 2 ways that we can adjust the pH level. We can use what we call a pH up, which is a basic solution, so the more you add, the more base there is in the solution, or pH down. The more pH down we use, lowers the pH. So we can reduce the pH, or that acidity level, to meet our needs of our different crops. So when we talk about measuring nutrients, we have something called a truncheon nutrient meter. So this measures our parts per million for us. So when I stick this into the water, we'll have some lights light up for us. When we take a look at these lights, it tells us how many parts per million. So right here, we're bouncing between 400 and 500 parts per million. There's also a couple different measurements that we can take a look at. We have total dissolved solids, TDS, and EC, or electroconductivity. These are both different measurements for nutrients, or parts per million. So we have our lettuce rafts right here, and we're going to measure the nutrients for this water. As you can see, we are measuring between 500 and 600 parts per million for the total dissolved solids.